When my father passed away, he left me a plot of land in an HOA-governed neighborhood. At first glance, it might not have seemed like much, just an empty lot with no house, no structures, nothing but dirt. Some might have thought it was a worthless inheritance, but I saw potential. Through research, I discovered that homes in the area were selling for a significant amount of money, making it prime real estate. My father had always wanted the best for me, and I felt like this was his way of giving me an opportunity to secure my financial future. My plan was simple: design a house, build it, and then sell it for a high profit. Since I had experience in design, I could create the blueprints myself and pass them on to an architect to bring to life. However, there was one major hurdle: the homeowners association. Even though I had never personally dealt with them before, I had heard more than enough horror stories online. This particular HOA had a notorious reputation, with multiple posts detailing just how corrupt and controlling they were, especially when it came to construction permits. The HOA president, in particular, was described as someone who made life difficult for anyone who didn't follow his every demand. Despite knowing this, I was confident in my plan and believed I could navigate their restrictions without too much trouble. Just as I was preparing to move forward with the project, my life took an unexpected and devastating turn. While I was abroad for business, I was involved in a horrific car accident. A truck ran a red light and hit my car from the driver's side, leaving me with severe injuries. I was lucky to survive, but the aftermath was brutal. Broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, a shattered nose from the airbag, severe whiplash, and a concussion so bad that my memory became unreliable. The recovery process was grueling. I spent 6 months in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries and painful physical therapy sessions just to regain basic mobility. Even after I was discharged, I was in no condition to travel or deal with anything outside of focusing on my recovery. During that time, my land was the last thing on my mind. I wasn't thinking about the HOA, the house I wanted to build, or anything outside of simply surviving and healing. The mental toll was just as bad as the physical injuries. At times, I felt so overwhelmed by pain and exhaustion that I questioned whether surviving the crash was even worth it. It took another 2 or 3 months before I was well enough to consider returning to the US and checking on the property my father had left me. When I finally traveled back to see the land, nothing could have prepared me for what I found. I had expected to see the same empty lot that had been waiting for me before the accident, but instead, I was greeted by a shocking sight: a fully built house, occupied by an entirely different family. At first, I thought I had made a mistake, that maybe my concussion had damaged my memory more than I realized, and I was looking at the wrong plot of land. But after double-checking my records and physically verifying the location, the awful truth set in: my property had been stolen right out from under me. The HOA had somehow seized the land, built a house on it, and sold it to an investor, all without my knowledge or consent. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. My brother, who had accompanied me on the trip, could see the rage building inside me, and he did his best to keep me calm. But I was beyond furious. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was theft, fraud, and a blatant violation of my rights. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The first thing I wanted to do was confront the HOA president face-to-face and demand answers. We stormed into the HOA office, refusing to leave until I got to speak with the president directly. When I finally saw him, I didn't hold back. I told him in no uncertain terms that he had no right to touch my land, let alone sell it. But instead of reacting with guilt or even a hint of concern, he smirked and brushed me off as if I were the one in the wrong. He claimed that because I had been gone for so long, the land was considered a nuisance, and under their bylaws, they had the right to claim it. I was beyond livid. I shouted back that I had never signed anything agreeing to those bylaws, and that the land was rightfully mine to build on or sell as I saw fit. He was nothing more than a thief in a suit, and I made sure he knew it. My brother had to physically pull me out of the office because I was getting too worked up, and considering my still healing injuries, I was putting myself in danger. But I wasn't done. If the HOA thought they could bully me into accepting this, they were dead wrong. I was going to fight back, no matter what it took. With my brother's help, I started gathering information about how this had happened. We dug through records, tracked down the buyer, and soon uncovered something even more suspicious. The investor who had purchased the house wasn't just some random buyer. He was a personal friend of the HOA president. That connection made it clear that this wasn't just a case of mismanagement or misunderstanding. It was corruption. They had stolen my land, built a house on it, and sold it to someone they knew, all while assuming I wouldn't come back to challenge them. But that wasn't the worst part. I knew I needed a lawyer, so I hired one to help me fight their fraudulent claims. That's when we uncovered the most damning piece of evidence. The HOA had submitted a forged death certificate in my name to the court. They had literally faked my death to justify seizing the property. That wasn't just fraud, it was a criminal act that could bring serious legal consequences. This battle wasn't just about reclaiming my land anymore, it was about exposing the entire HOA's corruption and making sure they paid for what they had done. Armed with undeniable proof of fraud, my lawyer wasted no time in filing a lawsuit against the HOA and everyone involved in the fraudulent land grab. We submitted evidence of the forged death certificate, property records proving I was still the rightful owner, and the suspicious connection between the HOA president and the so-called buyer. The moment we filed, things started moving fast. The court issued an immediate injunction preventing any further sales or modifications to the property, which meant that, for now, the house was frozen in legal limbo. But that didn't mean the HOA was going to back down without a fight. Instead of admitting their crime and trying to settle, they doubled down. Their lawyer attempted to argue that I had been missing and unreachable for nearly a year and that the HOA was simply following its bylaws to preserve neighborhood property values. It was an absurd excuse, one that completely ignored the fact that faking my death was not only unethical but illegal. Still, they seemed confident that they could either outlast me in court or pressure me into a quiet settlement. They underestimated just how far I was willing to go to bring them down. While the legal battle was unfolding, the new owners of the house, the investor and his family, weren't too happy about the situation either. They had no idea they had bought a stolen property, and when the truth came out, they panicked. They had poured money into renovations, new furniture, and landscaping, only to find out that the house was built on land that never legally belonged to them in the first place. Their frustration quickly turned into anger, not at me, but at the HOA president who had orchestrated the whole thing. They confronted him, demanding answers, and even went as far as to threaten their own lawsuit against the HOA for selling them a fraudulent property. Seeing the pressure mounting from both sides, the HOA president finally started to crack. But instead of apologizing or trying to negotiate a fair resolution, he did what corrupt people always do when they feel cornered. He tried to cover his tracks. He attempted to destroy records, altering paperwork to make it seem like I had abandoned the land willingly. He even claimed that I had verbally agreed to let the HOA take over the property before I left for my trip. Thankfully, my lawyer had already secured copies of the original documents, so his desperate attempts at deception only made him look guiltier. As the case went to trial, the media caught wind of the scandal. Local news stations started reporting on the corruption within the HOA, and soon enough, it became a public spectacle. Journalists began digging into the HOA's history, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. This wasn't the first time they had illegally seized property from someone. Over the past decade, they had used similar tactics to take land from elderly residents who had trouble keeping up with HOA fees, manipulating rules and paperwork to justify their actions. Several former homeowners came forward, sharing their stories of how they had been forced out of their properties through shady legal loopholes. The public outrage was immediate. Homeowners from the neighborhood banded together to demand accountability, and soon, the authorities had no choice but to launch a full-scale investigation into the HOA's dealings. The once untouchable HOA president was now facing multiple lawsuits, not just from me but from other victims as well. What had started as a personal fight to reclaim my land had grown into a full-blown takedown of an entire corrupt system. Despite their best efforts to stall, the court eventually ruled in my favor. The judge not only confirmed that I was the rightful owner of the land, but also declared the forged death certificate an act of criminal fraud. The HOA president, along with several board members who had conspired with him, was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. The investor, realizing he had been duped, quickly settled with me, agreeing to vacate the property in exchange for compensation from the HOA itself. With the house now legally mine, I had a choice to make. I could keep it and move in, or I could sell it and move on. After everything I had been through, the land no longer felt like a blessing from my father. It felt tainted, a reminder of the corruption I had fought against. So, I made the decision to sell it, not to another investor, but to a family who truly needed a home. I listed the house at a fair price, ensuring that a hard-working family, rather than another corrupt official, would benefit from it. With the sale finalized, I felt a sense of closure. But even after everything, I wasn't done. I used the money I had won from the lawsuit, along with the profits from selling the house, to help launch an organization dedicated to fighting HOA corruption. I wasn't the only victim of predatory HOA practices, and I wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. The exposure of my case led to state lawmakers proposing stricter regulations on HOAs, preventing them from seizing property through fraudulent means. What started as a personal battle for justice had turned into a movement, forcing change in a system that had long preyed on the powerless. Looking back, I realized that my father had indeed left me a gift, but it wasn't the land itself. It was the opportunity to fight for something bigger than myself, to stand up against corruption, and to make a real difference. And that, more than anything, was a legacy worth carrying forward. I grew up in a home that was far from picture perfect. My parents, though they did their best, were constantly battling their own demons, whether it was financial struggles, personal hardships, or simply the weight of life pressing down on them. Because of that, I never received a lot of attention as a child, not out of neglect or malice, but because they were often too preoccupied with their own problems to notice the smaller details of my life. I never held it against them, but it meant that I had to learn how to navigate life without the constant guiding hand of parental support. My wife, on the other hand, came from a completely different world. Her parents were incredibly comfortable, both financially and emotionally, and she was raised in an environment filled with warmth, stability, and love. While I don't resent her for that, it's a stark contrast to my own upbringing, which sometimes makes me feel like we come from two entirely different planets. We're close, at least close enough to function as a couple, but I wouldn't say we have an unbreakable bond where we share our deepest thoughts and emotions freely. In many ways, I feel more connected to her family than I do to my own. I absolutely adore her parents, and her younger sister is like the sibling I never had. Financially, we are doing quite well as a couple. We make about $150,000 a year combined, which is a solid income for our lifestyle. My wife works as a law firm assistant, earning around $60,000 annually, while I work as an auto technician, bringing in about $90,000. We are fortunate enough to own a home together, but I have to admit that we wouldn't have been able to afford the down payment without the generosity of her family. They stepped in and helped us with that major financial hurdle, and I've always been aware of and grateful for their contribution. If things ever went south between us, I've already made peace with the fact that I wouldn't fight for that money. It was a gift from her parents, and they can have it back if we ever end up selling the house. I don't care about material possessions in that way. What matters to me is fairness, and I would never try to take something that wasn't rightfully mine. Our other assets include our 2 cars, some furniture, and a decent amount of savings that we've both contributed to over the years. I believe in splitting everything fairly, and I wouldn't be out to screw her over in any way if we ever had to go our separate ways. Some people have questioned the amount of time my wife spends at the gym, but it never really struck me as odd or suspicious. We go to separate gyms because we have different workout styles and schedules. She gets off work at around 4 p.m. and heads straight to the gym, where she takes a class, lifts weights, and then does cardio on the treadmill. By the time she gets home, I'm already there, waiting for her. The routine is always the same. She walks in, heads straight for the shower, and then we make dinner together and spend the rest of the evening hanging out. I never saw any reason to doubt her or second-guess her gym habits. To me, it was just part of her routine, a way for her to stay healthy and active. That was until I stumbled upon something unexpected, something that sent my mind spiraling down a rabbit hole of doubt and paranoia. I was cleaning her car, as I often do, and while vacuuming under her seat, I found something that made my stomach drop, a condom wrapper. It wasn't just any piece of trash. It was a very specific item that had no logical reason to be in her vehicle. That moment, my mind raced in 1,000 different directions. I had never suspected my wife of cheating before, but suddenly, every innocent action and detail in our lives felt like it had the potential to be something sinister. Could she have been meeting someone at the gym? Could she have found a way to sneak around despite our closely managed finances and shared time? My rational side told me not to jump to conclusions, but my emotions were screaming at me that something wasn't right. I considered hiring a private investigator or even a lawyer, but realistically, that wasn't an option. We keep our finances open and transparent, and there was no way I could secretly divert money towards something like that without her noticing. Instead, I decided to take a more direct approach. Someone had mentioned that I could check our phone records through Verizon, so I planned to look into that when I had some time alone. My idea was to see if she had been in frequent contact with a number I didn't recognize. If I found anything suspicious, then I would have a solid reason to confront her. If I didn't, then maybe, just maybe, there was some other explanation for the condom wrapper. Before I could even start investigating, the weight of my suspicions became too much to bear. I found myself obsessing over every little detail, questioning things I had never questioned before. I even drove by her workplace during my lunch break, just to confirm that her car was there like it was supposed to be. And of course, it was. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and that was both reassuring and frustrating at the same time. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be a simple explanation, but I knew that I couldn't just brush this off. The wrapper was there. It had to have come from somewhere. I went over all the advice I had received: track her, check her phone, hire someone, dig deeper. But in the end, I couldn't take it anymore. The stress was eating me alive, and I decided I had to confront her that night. No more waiting, no more theories. I would lay the condom wrapper on the table and see how she reacted. That would tell me everything I needed to know. I was absolutely terrified of what I might find out, but I knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. That evening, I sat at the dining table, my mind racing as I clutched the condom wrapper in my hand. My wife walked in right on schedule, tossing her gym bag onto the couch like she always did. She gave me a quick smile before heading toward the bathroom, but I called her name before she could disappear down the hallway. There was something in my voice, something unfamiliar, even to me. It wasn't anger, not yet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. She turned around, her expression shifting to one of mild concern, and asked me what was wrong. Instead of answering right away, I placed the condom wrapper on the table between us. I watched her face closely, searching for any sign of guilt or recognition. Her eyes flickered down to the small piece of foil, and for a split second, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something cross her face. Was it shock? Panic? Relief? I couldn't tell, but before I could analyze it further, she let out a short, breathy laugh and said, "What is this?" I leaned forward, my fingers pressing against the table's surface. "I found it in your car," I said, my voice controlled but firm. I didn't accuse her outright. I wanted to see how she would respond first. She frowned, her eyebrows knitting together, and shook her head. "That's weird," she muttered, picking it up between her fingers. "I have no idea where this came from." I didn't say anything. I just watched her, waiting. She exhaled sharply and ran a hand through her hair. "Maybe it was from one of my co-workers? I gave Maddie a ride last week when her car was in the shop." It was a plausible excuse, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her voice was steady, but I could sense an underlying tension. I pressed further, asking if Maddie was in a relationship, if she had a reason to be carrying around condoms. My wife hesitated, just for a second, but then nodded. "Yeah, she's been seeing some guy," she said. "Maybe it fell out of her bag." It was a weak excuse, and we both knew it. I stared at her, my heart pounding. "Are you sure about that?" I asked quietly. I wanted to give her a chance to come clean if she was lying. She met my gaze, her jaw tightening just slightly. "Yes," she said, a little too quickly. I could feel the weight of unspoken words between us, an invisible chasm growing wider by the second. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. "Okay," I finally said, sitting back in my chair. "If that's the case, then you won't mind if I ask Maddie myself." That was the moment I saw it, that flicker of panic in her eyes. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared, but it was enough. "Why would you do that?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "That would be so weird. She'd think you don't trust me." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "I just want to clear things up. If it really was hers, she won't mind confirming it." My wife pressed her lips together, clearly trying to find the right response. Long silence stretched between us before she finally sighed, dropping the condom wrapper back onto the table. "Look," she said, crossing her arms. "I don't know how it got there. Maybe it was Maddie's, maybe it wasn't. But I can promise you that I haven't cheated on you. I love you, and I would never do that." Her words were firm, but there was something almost rehearsed about them. I wanted to believe her, but doubt had already taken root in my mind. It didn't help that she was acting defensive, shutting down the conversation instead of reassuring me. If she had nothing to hide, why was she so against me asking Maddie? Why wasn't she angry that I even suspected her? Instead of fighting back, she just wanted to end the discussion as quickly as possible. "Okay," I said again, standing up. "Then you won't mind if I check our phone records." That was the moment her composure cracked. Her face paled slightly, her mouth opening as if she wanted to argue, but then she quickly closed it again. She turned away, rubbing her forehead. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered. "This is paranoia, and it's not healthy for our marriage." But she didn't outright refuse. She didn't say, "Go ahead and check." Instead, she tried to make me feel like I was the problem, like I was overreacting. That was enough confirmation for me. I didn't need to check the records. I already knew the truth. My stomach churned as I realized what was happening, what had been happening right under my nose. The gym trips, the quick showers, the defensiveness. It all fit together in a way I hadn't wanted to see before. The woman I had built my life with, the woman I had trusted completely, was hiding something. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that my marriage was built on a lie.